It's a strange moment the first time you see it. You open your banking app, and instead of the usual number that barely survives the month, you see $1,000 sitting there. Not your paycheck, not rent money, not money already promised to someone else, just money that's yours. And for a second, you almost don't believe it. Because if you're like most people, money has never really felt like something you have. It's something that passes through your hands. You get paid, bills come in, groceries, transport, maybe something small for yourself, and then suddenly it's the end of the month again. So the idea of having $1,000 just sitting there feels different. Not life-changing, not I'm rich now, but something quietly shifts. Because the first $1,000 doesn't really change your bank account. It changes the way you see money itself. And once that shift happens, it's very hard to go back. Here's the strange part. Most people think financial change begins with a big salary, a promotion, a successful business, a lucky investment. But when you look at the stories of people who eventually become financially stable, almost all of them remember a very small moment. Not when they made their first million, but when they saved their first 1,000. And if you've never done it before, that number sounds almost underwhelming. $1,000 isn't a house, it isn't retirement, it won't even cover many emergencies. So why does it matter so much? Because before that moment, money usually feels like something that controls you. Your expenses control you. Your next paycheck controls you. Unexpected problems control you. Your car breaks down, your phone stops working, your job delays your payment by a week, and suddenly your entire life feels fragile. It's not just about money, it's about stress. The quiet anxiety of knowing that one small problem could throw everything off balance. And when you live in that cycle long enough, something subtle happens in your mind. You start believing that saving money is something other people do. People with higher salaries, people with less responsibility, people who somehow have it easier. So when someone says you should save money, it can almost feel unrealistic, like telling someone drowning in waves to just calmly start swimming. But here's the thing most financial advice misses. The first $1,000 is not really about the money. It's about breaking a psychological barrier. Because until you've done it once, saving feels almost impossible. After you've done it once, it suddenly feels repeatable. Let me explain something interesting about human psychology. Our brains are extremely sensitive to proof. Not theory, not advice, proof. Before you save your first $1,000, the idea of building savings lives in the same mental category as things like running a marathon or starting a company. Possible in theory, but distant. Then one day, slowly, through small decisions, it happens. Maybe you skipped a few impulse purchases. Maybe you saved part of a tax return. Maybe you spent 3 or 4 months being more careful than usual. And suddenly the number appears, 1,000. And something very quiet but very powerful happens in your mind. You realize, oh, I can actually do this. Not in an inspirational way, in a very practical way. Because once your brain has evidence that something is possible, it stops resisting the idea so strongly. The impossible becomes uncomfortable but achievable. And that's the first shift. But the deeper change comes after that. Because once you have your first financial cushion, even a small one, the world starts to look different. Before savings, every unexpected expense feels like a mini crisis. Your car needs repair, your laptop stops working, a medical bill appears, and suddenly you're calculating everything in your head. Can I delay this? Can I borrow money? Which bill can I push to next month? But with a small cushion, something changes. The problem still exists, but the panic doesn't arrive the same way. You don't feel trapped anymore. You feel buffered. And that word matters more than most people realize, because financial stress is rarely about the size of the expense. It's about the feeling of having no margin. Living paycheck to paycheck means your life has zero shock absorbers. Everything hits you directly. But $1,000 creates the first thin layer of protection between you and chaos. And even if it's small, psychologically it feels enormous. Something else happens too, and it's a shift almost nobody talks about. Your relationship with spending starts to change. Before savings, money tends to feel temporary. You spend because it's already disappearing anyway. You think things like, "I'll just buy this. It's only $20. I deserve something nice after this week." And honestly, those thoughts are completely normal. When money flows in and out quickly, it's hard to feel connected to it. But when you build your first savings cushion, money suddenly gains weight. Not guilt, weight. You start noticing trade-offs. Buying something now means reducing your buffer. And that realization doesn't always stop you from spending, but it introduces a new kind of awareness. You stop seeing money as something that exists only in the present moment. You start seeing it as something that protects your future self. And that's a very powerful shift. But here's the interesting part. Saving your first $1,000 doesn't make life perfect. Emergencies can still happen, unexpected problems still appear, but something deeper changes in your identity. Before, you might have thought of yourself as someone who isn't good with money, someone who just gets by, someone who never seems to save. But now, that story is no longer completely true, because there's literal evidence sitting in your account. And identity changes are powerful. Once you see yourself as someone who can save, even a little, your future decisions start aligning with that identity. Not perfectly, but gradually. You might save again next month, or rebuild the cushion after using part of it already, or start thinking about something you've never thought about before. Investing. Not in a complicated way, not with risky strategies or market timing, but simply as the next step in the journey. Because the first $1,000 teaches you a fundamental principle about money, that wealth rarely begins with big dramatic moves. It begins with control. Control over small decisions, control over timing, control over the distance between what you earn and what you spend. There's also something deeply calming about having even a small financial cushion. And if you've never experienced it before, it's hard to describe. It's not excitement. It's not pride. It's closer to quiet relief, like exhaling after holding your breath for a long time. Because money stress often sits in the background of life like a low buzzing noise. You don't always notice it, but it's always there. What if something happens? What if I lose my job? What if my expenses suddenly rise? But the moment you build even a small buffer, the volume of that noise drops. Not completely, but noticeably. And when stress decreases, something interesting happens. Your decision-making improves. You think more clearly. You panic less. You stop making rushed financial choices simply to survive the moment. And that alone can change the trajectory of someone's financial life. Now here's the part that often surprises people. The first $1,000 is usually the hardest, not because of the amount, but because you're fighting against old habits, old beliefs, and old patterns. You're learning new behaviors for the first time. You're building awareness where none existed before. But once that milestone is crossed, the second one tends to come faster. Not instantly, but faster. Because now you understand the process. You know where money leaks out. You know what trade-offs feel acceptable. And most importantly, You know the effort actually produces results. That's incredibly motivating. Not in a hype-driven way, but in a grounded, realistic way. If someone is starting this journey today, the goal doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't require extreme frugality. It doesn't require giving up everything enjoyable in life. Often, it simply starts with awareness, noticing where money quietly disappears, pausing before certain purchases, setting aside small amounts consistently, even if they feel insignificant. Because what matters most isn't speed, it's proof. The moment your brain sees that the number can grow, something fundamental changes. And from that point on, the story you tell yourself about money starts evolving. So if you're still working toward your first $1,000, you're not behind. You're not bad with money. You're simply in the part of the journey where the system hasn't clicked yet. And when it finally does, the shift is surprisingly powerful. Not because $1,000 solves every problem, but because it shows you that financial stability isn't built in giant leaps. It's built through small, repeated decisions that slowly reshape how you see money. And once that perspective changes, progress stops feeling impossible. It starts feeling inevitable as long as you keep moving. Not perfectly, not quickly, just steadily. Because when it comes to money, the goal isn't perfection. It's building enough stability that life stops feeling like a constant balancing act. And sometimes that journey quietly begins with the most ordinary-looking number in the world, 1,000.